Okay, let's unpack one of the most powerful and I think often startling biblical encounters recorded in the Gospels. We're embarking on a deep dive today into the story of Jesus healing the tormented man or men in the rugged region of the Gadarenes.
It really is a moment that captures the very essence of the Lord's
Mm.
ministry. We're trying to move beyond just a surface reading of the text and get into the historical setting, the theological weight, and, the immediate practical application of this startling work of mercy.
That's the mission, to understand this encounter not just as a historical event, but as a roadmap for the king's authority over darkness in our own lives today.
Exactly. And the location itself, it's absolutely vital to the story's drama. I mean, think about the sequence.
Yeah.
We've just seen Jesus still a massive storm on the Sea of Galilee.
An amazing display of power over chaos.
A total display of power. And then he immediately crosses the lake to the eastern side where you have these basalt cliffs descending toward the water. This is Gentile soil. This is not the familiar world of Capernaum or Nazareth.
It's an intentional boundary crossing, isn't it? Jesus could have easily stayed on the Western Jewish side. Instead, he steps onto the Eastern Shore, a place where, Jewish law and custom held very little sway.
Right. And there, waiting on the shore, was this singular representation of human agony and spiritual tyranny, a man living among the tombs. This setting, east of the Sea of Galilee, it establishes the mission instantly.
And that leads to the fundamental takeaway the source material really highlights. The focus here isn't getting caught up in the details of the nomenclature. Is it Gadarene, Gerasene, or Gergesene?
Right, those are secondary.
They're secondary issues of local geography. The core truth, the real interest of Scripture, is the Lord's authority.
Absolutely. The names simply place the event in a specific geographical area. The event itself proves who Jesus is. This is the moment where the one who demonstrates authority over nature by calming the waves also demonstrates authority over the unseen realm.
He's showing his complete dominion.
Yes, he is the one who chains the strong man and restores a human being to true dignity, even if that act of grace is, well, pretty unsettling to the surrounding community.
So if we're reading this narrative through that kind of historical and theological lens, the framework of a dispensational reading becomes really important. For you listening, that term might sound a bit academic, so let's quickly clarify. What does approaching this story through that framework allow us to see?
It allows us to properly sequence God's plan. I mean, we know that Jesus' primary earthly ministry was directed first and foremost to the lost sheep of Israel. That was the initial focus of the kingdom announcement.
Right.
However, this deliberate boundary crossing, going into Gentile territory to perform this singular, profound work, it serves as a powerful, intentional anticipation.
So it's not an accident, it's a preview.
Precisely. It acts as a stunning sneak peek of what is coming after the cross and resurrection. It foreshadows the church's worldwide mandate, the Great Commission, go and make disciples of all nations. So this event in the Decapolis reveals the king's authority over the unseen realm, and it honors the distinction between Israel and the nations in the timing of his ministry, while ultimately foreshadowing the grace that would flow globally to all people.
That roadmap is crucial for keeping us grounded. So we're going to walk through the historical context of this fascinating border region. We'll analyze the dramatic biblical narrative, delve deeply into the theological significance of this display of authority, and finally, bring it all home with practical spiritual lessons for our lives today. Let's start by painting a vague picture of the world Jesus entered. We begin with a geographical and cultural setting. The Decapolis, this was not some minor isolated village. Describe this region for us. What does it mean that it was a league of 10 Hellenistic cities?
Well, the Decapolis, the 10 cities, was a collective of independent Hellenistic urban centers located primarily east of the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee. They were established following the conquests of Alexander the Great centuries earlier, and they maintained a fiercely Greek identity.
So these are Greek cities, culturally speaking.
Oh, absolutely. The Romans later organized and integrated them into the provincial order, but this was a place defined by high Greek culture.
So we're talking about more than just some small towns. What would a traveler actually see there?
You would see monumental architecture. I mean, think theaters for Greek drama, colonnaded streets, forums, public baths, and sophisticated water systems. These cities, like Gadara, Gerasa, which is modern Gerasenes and Decapolis, they were centers of commerce, of intellectual life, and, critically, of pagan worship.
They were fully invested in Greek and Roman society then, offering things like Greek schooling, philosophy, wealth, a world entirely shaped by the nations.
Exactly. And culturally, this is so significant because it contrasts so sharply with the Jewish culture of Galilee just across the lake. The population and outlook were overwhelmingly Gentile, even though, some Jewish communities were nearby.
That tension is key, isn't it?
It is. These Gentile cities, though integrated into the Roman system, they felt very distinct from Jerusalem and Judea. In Mark and Matthew, you see that this region, the Transjordan, drew large crowds later in Jesus' ministry, but initially it was a world steeped in Hellenistic tradition and pagan piety. It was a place of altars to many gods, as our source notes.
Okay, let's clarify the geography and the sometimes confusing nomenclature. We hear Gadara, Gerasenes, and Gerasenes. Why the mix?
It's really an issue of territorial designation versus a specific city location. So Gadara was an important city on elevated ground, situated some distance southeast of the Sea of Galilee. Gerasa was even farther inland, a massive city.
So the gospel writers are using a broader term.
Right. They use the broader territorial designation about the region or country of the Gerasenes or Gadarenes. They are talking about the general area that fell under the influence or the jurisdiction of these major cities.
So the evangelists aren't disagreeing on the location of the miracle. They're just using slightly different but overlapping descriptors for the district.
Precisely. The key geographical feature required by the narrative is that steep bank, the one that descends directly to the lake where the pigs drowned. And that territorial designation, country of, is broad enough to include the shoreline slopes necessary for the event described in Luke and Mark.
So the different names actually just confirm the unified portrait of the place. This was a true borderland.
It was a borderland where the king of Israel chose to confront the powers, where Israel's world met the nation's world.
And that confrontation is underlined by the presence of that massive herd of pigs. This is the crucial cultural confirmation of the region's Gentile nature.
The pigs, yes.
Why is their presence the definitive cultural marker for the thoughtful Christian reader?
Well, under Moses' law, pigs were explicitly unclean animals. They weren't to be eaten or touched or even kept, according to Leviticus. A Jewish person would never maintain a herd of 2,000 swine.
So their presence is like a giant sign that says, "Not Israel."
It confirms the economics of this area were thoroughly Gentile, focused on supplying meat or market goods for the non-Jewish population and the trade routes that were skirting the lake.
And this immediately makes the cost of the miracle measurable. The loss of that herd of swine wasn't a minor annoyance, it was a major commercial event.
It was an economic disaster for the owners. The source rightly notes that the loss of the swine became a visible, calculated measure of what deliverance cost that day to a city that prized commerce above all else. It sets up the central conflict of the story perfectly.
Which is?
The snark, brutal contrast between the immense commercial value of the herd and the infinite spiritual worth of the single restored human being.
So we have this cultural context. A wealthy, sophisticated Hellenistic area that was largely secular or pagan, deeply focused on trade and prosperity.
Yes, and the source contextualizes this beautifully, noting that while the Decapolis offered high culture, it simultaneously offered altars to many gods and bartered the souls of men for prosperity. You can see echoes of the Old Testament's condemnation of other trading hubs like Tyre and Sidon that valued wealth and security over justice and mercy.
So that focus on commerce made the entire region vulnerable to a kind of a spiritual blindness where the material was elevated far above the spiritual.
Absolutely.
That juxtaposition is truly chilling. The source says Jesus stepped into a world of polished public squares and haunted graveyards. It says there was rational talk and irrational bondage, and wealth that could not ransom one tormented heart. It was a place of high civilization failing miserably at basic humanity.
That summary paints the stage perfectly. It sets up the confrontation. It's a moment when the ultimate authority steps into the place where human society, wealth, and sophisticated culture had completely failed, unable to help or contain this man who represented spiritual and psychological collapse.
So, knowing the place, let's now turn to the man himself and the terrifying drama that unfolds. The narrative begins with a description of the man's misery, primarily found in Mark chapter 5. Jesus came ashore, and immediately this man, controlled by an impure spirit, came from the tombs to meet him. What do those details tell us about his state?
The location alone, the tombs, speaks volumes. Under Jewish law, graves were places of profound defilement and death. To live there meant utter isolation, complete separation from the community and human life. He was a man literally dwelling in the realm of death.
And the physical description just deepens the horror. Mark tells us no one could bind him, not even with chains. He had been repeatedly secured and repeatedly broke free.
It's a picture of irresistible supernatural strength being wielded against him. Human attempts to control the darkness through physical force or social isolation had failed entirely. And the details of his self-harm are just heartrending. He cried out night and day and cut himself with stones.
This isn't just external violence, it's internalized self-destructive rage.
It is.
That image of self-harm, isolation, and unmanageable violence is a devastating portrait of the destructive will of the serpent, a profound hatred aimed at destroying God's image, which the man was created to bear.
It shows the devastating consequences of spiritual bondage on the human condition, physical, psychological, and social. He was completely derailed, just a chaos of suffering. The demons had successfully hijacked his body and his voice.
And then comes the sudden encounter, Mark 5, verses 6 to 8. This terrifying figure who, moments ago, was breaking chains, runs and falls on his knees before Jesus. This is a very strange mix of submission and absolute terror.
It is utterly unique. The demons recognized Jesus instantly, even if the man himself was unrecognizable. And the shouted confession is startling. "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me."
This wasn't an act of faith or worship?
Not at all. It was an involuntary recognition of a superior authority, a preemptive plea from a position of absolute terror.
It's the ultimate acknowledgement of Christ's divine identity.
Yes, the power of Jesus' identity, Son of the Most High God, was so overwhelming that the demons were forced to acknowledge it. They knew they stood before their judge. The Bible confirms that even demons believe that there is one God and shudder, yet they remain in proud revolt. Their knowledge of Christ is perfect, but their defiance remains total, until confronted by his immediate presence.
Jesus then performs a crucial step.
Yeah.
He asks the name, and the chilling reply arrives. "My name is Legion, for we are many."
The sheer number implied here is terrifying. A Roman legion was a massive military unit, maybe 4,000 to 6,000 men. This signifies multiplied bondage and overwhelming tyranny. It suggests that the man's own personality was shattered beneath the weight of these intruders who had completely claimed his physical and spiritual being.
This wasn't simple possession. It was a hostile occupation on a massive scale.
That's a good way to put it. And these powerful spirits, they knew their time was up. They begged Jesus not to be sent out of the region entirely, or, even worse for them, into the abyss, a place of total confinement. Instead, they sought permission to enter the large herd of pigs nearby.
This detail is pivotal. They asked for a specific temporary dwelling place, the swine. And Jesus, for reasons related to both the man's freedom and the public sign this would create, gave them permission.
And the willingness of the spirits to enter the pigs really highlights their destructive nature. They didn't seek a safe haven, but a new vehicle for chaos.
That leads directly to the sign of the swine. The dramatic scale is almost impossible to imagine. 2,000 pigs, suddenly driven mad, rushing down the steep bank into the lake and drowning.
This was the public, massive, irrefutable demonstration of the exorcism. It made the invisible tyranny, the sheer destructive force of Legion, visible and instantly calculable. The town could see the economic price of the man's deliverance. The spirits entered the pigs, and immediately the true nature of their intent was revealed: destruction.
The townspeople could count their loss, but they failed to calculate the immeasurable gain of one restored soul. Which brings us to their reaction.
Yes, the herdsmen fled, terrified, and told everyone in the city and the countryside what had happened. People flooded back to the shoreline, and what they saw, well, it should have prompted worship. They saw the man they knew as a violent, naked, uncontrollable terror, now dressed and in his right mind, sitting calmly at Jesus' feet.
And what was their response?
Intense, overwhelming fear. A fear driven by loss, by disruption, and by an encounter with a terrifying, unpredictable power.
And this fear led them not to gratitude or seeking more grace, but to plead that Jesus depart their district. They consciously chose their predictable, secure economy over the unsettling, transformative grace that had just arrived.
It's a tragic choice.
We should briefly pause here to address the difference in the accounts regarding the number of men. Mark and Luke focus on one, while Matthew mentions 2 demonized men. How do we reconcile this?
That's an excellent point for the thoughtful reader. And it is not a contradiction, but a selection of detail based on the author's focus. Mark and Luke emphasize the spokesperson, the one who was clearly the most prominent or dramatic figure for narrative impact. Matthew, whose account is often more focused on cataloging Christ's authority, simply confirms the scale by noting he healed both.
So the essential truth remains universal across all 3 synoptics.
Yes. The Lord commands, the spirits obey, the swine are destroyed, the town fears, and a witness is commissioned. The core story is identical.
And that commission is where the narrative pivots from tragedy and terror to mercy and mission. Where the town begged Jesus to go, the delivered man begged to stay with him.
That contrast speaks volumes about the human heart. The man who was once hostile to humanity now only desired to be near the Lord who saved him. His desire was simple, pure, and right, and yet Jesus refused the request.
He appointed him instead as a herald in his own region. Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you.
It's astonishing. Jesus turned a former mouthpiece of darkness, whose voice had only been used for cursing and self-harm, into a voice for light, sending him immediately back to the very place where his shame and terror were greatest. He essentially commissioned an apostle to the Gentiles from the cemetery gate.
And the evidence suggests this witness was profoundly effective, serving as the first seed of the gospel in the Decapolis.
Yes. Later in the Gospels, we see large crowds coming to Jesus from the Decapolis, and Jesus even performs a massive feeding miracle on the eastern side of the lake. The narrative confirms that the man began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. The seeds sown among those tombs truly began to grow and bear fruit. It prepared the region for the gospel mandate that was to come.
Finally, let's place this miracle in the broader sequence of Mark's gospel. It follows the stilling of the storm and precedes the raising of Jairus' daughter.
This sequence is Mark's dramatic answer to the question, who is this man? The trilogy of miracles reveals the king's dominion over chaos, the storm, demons, legion, and death, Jairus' daughter. The narrative structure forces you, the thoughtful listener, to affirm the man's conclusion. Jesus is the Lord who saves, the only one who holds ultimate authority over all realms.
Now we move into the theological heart of the story. This deliverance in the Gadarenes is a profound display of messianic authority over the unseen powers. This is absolutely foundational to understanding Christ's entire mission, isn't it?
It is the purpose of his incarnation. Jesus didn't just come to teach, he came to wage war. His mission is to destroy the devil's work, to bind the strong man and plunder his house, and to free those who, through the fear of death, were held in spiritual slavery.
So when Legion fled, it was a profound, visible victory of the kingdom of God over the kingdom of darkness.
And it was planted specifically on Gentile soil.
Exactly. The expulsion of Legion plants a decisive signpost in the Decapolis, signaling the arrival of the stronger one. It proved that the kingdom of God, though advancing through Israel initially, would not stop at Israel's physical or cultural borders. This confrontation confirms that Jesus' authority is universal.
And this is where we need to revisit the dispensational lens and the order of the advance. We acknowledge Jesus' Israel-first ministry, but how do we balance that with this very public Gentile miracle?
Right.
Well, we have to hold those two truths in tension. The source essay emphasizes that Jesus was sent specifically to the lost sheep of Israel. He told the 12 to go only to the towns of Israel. That remains the theological anchor of his earthly ministry. However, he intentionally gave previews of Gentile inclusion.
The centurion servant.
The Syrophoenician woman, and now this man among the tombs.
Why are these previews so important in God's overarching plan?
They demonstrate God's universal love and authority without overriding the precise chronological framework of his covenant promises to Israel. The source is clear on this. These actions do not collapse the promises to Israel into the church. Instead, they foreshadow the global grace that would flow to the nations after the foundation of the church following the cross and Pentecost.
So Jesus is establishing his dominion everywhere, but the formal commission to go to all nations is reserved for a later time.
Precisely.
So the Decapolis man became the king's advanced agent, running ahead of the Great Commission itself.
That's a wonderful way to put it. He was a non-Jewish apostle commissioned directly by Jesus, whose testimony prepared the region for the larger harvest that came later. It shows God's sovereign intention to include the nations from the very beginning.
Let's turn to the dramatic setting itself. The source describes this as a triple unclean setting under the law. That level of defilement is important to recognize.
It is the ultimate test of holiness. You have the tombs, the presence of death, which caused ceremonial defilement. You have the swine, ritually unclean food that confirmed the Gentile surroundings. And you have the demons, the ultimate source of spiritual defilement. Jesus willingly stepped directly into this nexus of uncleanness.
And the Holy One did not contract defilement by his presence. He expelled it by his command.
Exactly. This proves that the purity of the kingdom is not defensive, it's active. Jesus' holiness radiates outward, cleansing everything it touches. It reverses the flow of defilement that characterized the Old Covenant law. Where the law was about separating the clean from the unclean, Jesus is about making the unclean clean.
He simply commanded the defilement to leave.
He did.
The outcome of that commanding power is immediately visible in the man, dressed and in his right mind.
This is the perfect, profound image of gospel restoration. Dressed speaks to the immediate clothing of his public shame. His nakedness was part of his terror. In his right mind speaks to restored sanity, identity, and inner peace.
The whole process anticipates the gospel's pattern for every conversion.
It does, putting off the old nature, being clothed with Christ, and sitting at the Lord's feet to learn a new, sane, and redeemed way of being human.
Let's confront the common moral question. The drowning of the pigs. Why the economic scandal? Why the financial devastation? The source material frames this as a sign, not a scandal.
It serves multiple theological functions. First, it vividly dramatizes the destructive intent of the powers that had occupied the man. The demons hate God's creation, and when they were given permission to act, they immediately chose destruction, as they always do.
And second, it underscores that profound statement of value.
The value of one soul versus 2,000 animals. Precisely.
Yeah.
Jesus demonstrates, in a way the townspeople could not ignore, that the life of one image bearer, one man created in God's likeness, outweighs the entire market value of the most profitable herd in the Decapolis.
This is a divine revaluation of human life versus material wealth. A valuation the townspeople ultimately rejected by prioritizing their balance sheet.
They prioritized predictable profits over unsettling grace.
It is the eternal, tragic flaw.
Yes. The loss of the animals stung their Gentile economy, but the removal of the reign of terror and the restoration of a man who could now speak and think was a spiritual gain of infinite measure. The story confirms that the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost, and no material cost is too high for that salvation.
And finally, that critical commission to go home. This dignifies local mission and every believer's place of assignment.
It tells us that not all mission is far-flung and glamorous. The most crucial mission for many is across the threshold of their own home, back to the neighbors and family where former shame had alienated love. The Decapolis received its first evangelist from the cemetery bait.
This teaches the church that the earliest, most immediate field is often the most strategic, even if it feels the most difficult. Your own community, your own family.
Exactly. The most important witness often happens where you are already known.
We've built the foundation. Now let's bring these truths to bear on our daily walk. The first foundational lesson we draw from this encounter is the power of Christ's command. No bondage lies beyond Christ's word. The man whom chains could not hold bowed instantly to the command, "Come out."
This should be an incredible source of assurance for every believer. We live in a world where we battle against rulers, authorities, and powers of this dark world. We struggle with personal bondages, habits, or psychological strongholds that feel as unbreakable as chains. But this story reminds us that every dark power, every stronghold, must bow instantly to the authority of the risen King.
It shifts our focus from our weakness to his sovereignty.
Absolutely. We fight under a banner that has already been raised in triumph at the cross. Colossians 2:15 says that through the cross, Christ disarmed the principalities and powers and publicly displayed them as conquered foes. Therefore, our confidence is not in our own strength to overcome darkness, but in the captain's authority over those forces.
If the Son sets free, you are free indeed.
That's the promise. No generational sin, no personal addiction, no pattern of fear is beyond the reach of the King's simple command. We must pray with the confidence that the same voice that calmed the storm can bring peace to our inner chaos.
The second lesson speaks directly to how Christ initiates contact and where his mission leads us. Jesus seeks out the avoided. He crossed a massive, storm-tossed lake, a high-risk journey, just to reach a man the entire town had deemed utterly worthless, incurable, and forgotten.
Think about the effort involved in that. That journey was not convenient. Jesus could have spent that day ministering to thousands in Galilee. Instead, he goes to the one man in the place of death. The application here is vital. Jesus still crosses boundaries, social, economic, psychological, to reach the isolated, the self-harming, and the spiritually tormented people that society has discarded.
He doesn't flinch from the places of maximum defilement and maximum despair.
Not at all.
What does that mean for the church today, then? For us as his disciples?
It means we must actively follow his example and risk our own reputation and comfort. If Jesus, the Holy One, went to the tombs, we must be willing to stand near tombs and speak peace. This is not comfortable ministry. It often involves engaging with the people who make us uneasy, who disrupt our routines, and who challenge our social status.
And we also must recognize that the Lord often appoints those he frees.
Yes, the former addicts, the formerly isolated, the broken, he appoints them as the most effective heralds to the very communities that once feared them.
The third lesson is a sharp, necessary warning directed at the heart of our priorities. The love of possessions and security can harden hearts. The townspeople saw the miraculous transformation, but their emotional calculus focused entirely on the drowned pigs. They prioritized their balance sheet.
They did. They saw a man restored and an economy disturbed, and they chose the economy. They pleaded for Jesus to leave, effectively choosing predictable profits over the unpredictable, unsettling grace that had disrupted their status quo. This is a severe warning for us today, especially in wealthy cultures.
The warning isn't necessarily against owning things.
No, but it's against calculating goodness only by what increases our comfort and our accounts.
It forces us to ask that critical question Jesus later posed. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?
That question is eternally relevant. If we are so attached to our comforts, our financial reserves, or our reputation that the thought of God's transformative work disrupting our routine causes us fear rather than joy, well, we are dangerously close to the mindset of the Gadarenes.
So we must learn to receive and release resources as stewards, not as slaves bound to our accounts.
Yes. When the Lord, through his providence or his mission, challenges or disrupts our herds, whether they be investments, time, or security, we must pause and ask what divine mercy has just walked ashore in exchange. It is a call to radical generosity and detachment from outcome.
The fourth lesson is about the immediate, accessible methodology of sharing this mercy. Testimony as a primary instrument of mission. The delivered man was not given a complex theological curriculum or a mandate to debate Hellenistic philosophy. He received a simple directive.
A very simple one. Tell how much the Lord has done for him and how he has had mercy. This is the most democratic and essential form of mission. It is something every Christian, regardless of their education or platform, can engage in. Your story is your syllabus. Your experience of grace is your credential.
It's a message every Christian can prepare in prayer and deliver in love. What was I like? What did Jesus do? And what is my life like now?
And the power lies in the authenticity. The Decapolis heard of Jesus from a voice it used to dread, a voice that was utterly convincing because the transformation was undeniable.
They saw the proof.
Exactly. When your life, shining in the place of your former darkness, becomes a testament, it is profoundly powerful. The local community knows your before and your after. That witness became a vital door for others when the Lord returned to the region later. We must never underestimate the power of personal testimony.
The fifth lesson assures us of Christ's complete dominion, both spiritual and geographical. Christ's authority extends over territories and times. The demons beg not to be sent out of the region, almost acting as if they held leases on land.
They certainly saw themselves as having territorial rights over the Decapolis, a center of pagan worship and Gentile rule. But the Lord immediately demonstrated that he, and he alone, holds the deeds to the land. He sent them exactly where he willed. And the delivered man, through his subsequent mission, filled that region with the news of the kingdom.
This affirms the truth that the earth belongs to the Lord, and he intends to fill it with the knowledge of his glory.
That's the cosmic reality. And for us today, in the church age, this authority is the fuel for the Great Commission. The command to go to all nations is entirely predicated on the declaration that all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me.
So we operate globally under the King's dominion.
Secure in the knowledge that every territory, every nation, every corner of the globe is subject to his rule. We move forward because he has commanded it, and he has the right to command it.
And while we are called to all nations today, we maintain the distinction that Israel's promises remain anchored for a future day when the King is welcomed in Jerusalem. This simultaneous focused global mission now, yet anchored covenants for Israel, is central to the comprehensive reading of Scripture.
It is the full picture of God's plan. The King is reigning now, authorizing global mission, even as the covenant promises for Israel's future spiritual restoration and national fulfillment remain certain. The Decapolis encounter helps us see the King's global heart without losing the structure of his revealed timing.
The sixth and final lesson is often the hardest, requiring the greatest surrender. The posture of a disciple is obedience to stay. The man begged to follow Jesus, to leave the terrible ghosts of the tombs behind, but he was refused. He had to obey the harder command to remain.
This is deeply convicting for many of us. We often equate deep discipleship with leaving our current difficult situation to be in a more protected, spiritual, or exciting environment, closer to Jesus, as it were. But the man was told, go home. Many of the Lord's hardest assignments for us are not glamorous departures to distant mission fields, but difficult, quiet stayings in the very places we desperately wish to escape.
The desire to follow Jesus physically was right, but the command to stay was strategic.
It was strategic for the kingdom and sanctifying for the man. Jesus sent him back to the relationships, the workplaces, and the communities where his testimony was needed most. We must trust that the Lord knows the most strategic location for our redeemed voice.
When we wish to be elsewhere, and the Lord says here that obedience in the ordinary, difficult place becomes true worship.
And that worship becomes mission. Faithfulness at home becomes the seedbed for regional awakening.
That is a truth that resonates profoundly with everyday life. It shifts the entire definition of mission from a geographical move to an act of faithful presence.
And it protects us from the spiritual danger of trying to follow Christ on our own terms. Obedience is paramount, even when it means remaining in the shadow of former shame to shine the light of present mercy.
This has truly been a profound deep dive into a text that forces us to reevaluate our priorities and our understanding of Christ's authority. On that wild, rocky shoreline of the Decapolis, holiness met horror and left mercy in its wake. The man no one could change sat clothed and clear-eyed. An economy that prized pigs more than people begged the Savior to leave, and one grateful heart was sent instead to speak.
The story remains a powerful lighthouse for every coast where darkness claims squatters' rights. Jesus frees captives from bondages that defy human restraint. He reorders economies under the rule of mercy, and he appoints the most unlikely heralds from the places of deepest despair. It proves that Christ writes new chapters where tombs once told the whole tale.
The narrative closes with a powerful challenge that transitions immediately from that moment in the past to our commission in the present. The Gadarenes first asked Jesus to leave. The church now, by the power of the Spirit, asks him to come and descend. Let's return to the specific commission he gave the man as our closing passage, found in Mark 5, verses 19 and 20. Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed.
The profound encouragement embedded in that verse is that the most powerful testimony you possess is personal. It is telling how much the Lord has done for you, personally, in your own life and in your own place. The implied warning, which we must heed, is to avoid letting your own preference or desire, even the good desire to be closer to Jesus in an idealized way, override the Lord's specific strategic assignment for your life. Obedience begins at home, with your own people, telling your own story. May you find deep joy in the specific place where the Lord has put you today, recognizing that you are a commissioned herald. And may your voice be used to tell your people, today and every day, how much mercy you have personally received.